So just before I go any further with the rest of the face, I'm going to get a bit of the neck area blocked in. I find again that often helps me see the values on the rest of the face much better. Also, to be able to work around the chin area and really shape that area, I feel like I need to get a bit of the neck in here first. So it shouldn't take me too long just to block in a few colours like I did initially with the face, using those same tones. And I don't know how much time I'll have to go into much detail on her neck and on her top, but it's such a lovely vibrant red, and a lot of those vibrant reds I'm using as nice reflected colour on her face, so I will at least get it coloured in so that we can see where the reflections on her face are really coming from. And I think towards the end I'll be able to get the hair blocked in a little bit more convincingly. Again, I should be able to be quite loose and maybe a bit more expressive in that area and leave it a little bit more unfinished. Of course, if you're working along, you can take as long as you like. You can pause the video and take your time on certain areas. Don't feel that you have to work at the same pace as me all the way through. But it will be nice just to get some of these lovely rich tones that run down the neck, just to give the face a little bit more of a base, getting the neck blocked in. I often find it's helpful to work on a neck area in a portrait, really without any main features, just looking at the tonal values. Just getting the main shapes on the neck, and like with the rest of the face, making sure that I give everything a good rub into the paper. So some lovely shadows in this area. And as I said, it's quite important to get some neck colour in so that you can work on defining the chin. Always a really important, possibly overlooked part in a portrait. And I actually have another people portrait demo just like this on my YouTube channel if you haven't seen it. But it was a male portrait, and I feel like I cheated a little bit because he has a beard. And beards always make chins much easier. You can get a beard blocked in and give the general idea of a person so quickly, whereas when you're talking about the smooth skin on a chin, there's no place to hide. You've got to get the structure of it correct. So this one is much more of a challenge, I feel, than my other people portrait demo. And mainly because we don't have a beard to hide underneath. There's really nowhere to hide on this face. We've just got to get the structure of it correct to get our likeness. And I always do think that beards make things a little bit easier. So we've got an open mouth smile, no beards. It really is a bit of a challenge, this one. But I like a challenge. So I think that we're probably about an hour and a half in at this stage, that's me guessing. And that's not bad, we're pretty well on. So lots of nice reflected reds coming from the top that she's wearing. And it also just helps to warm the overall skin tone, which is lovely. So of course over on this side of the neck we're in quite dark shadow here. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of my blue highlight. Not the brightest one either. Going for the more dull mid-tone blue. But it really does get quite dark over on this side of the portrait. So it's nice to have that contrast. So yeah, I feel I can probably darken this down even more with the black. And that dark shadow just coming from inside her top there. So don't be afraid to go really dark in the shadows where you think it is at its darkest. It's that dark contrast that will really help your highlights stand out. You won't really get the 3D effect unless you go dark enough within the shadows. And that's often where people just don't really feel that they should go too dark, especially on portraits. But sometimes there is actually a real need to use your darkest value. So just constantly comparing your values to those around it. But as I'm always saying, if you don't go dark enough to begin with, your overall effect will end up a little bit flat. So let's just get a little rim of lovely vibrant red in here just to mark the neckline of her shirt. Again, remembering that the shirt also disappears around the corner into the shadows. So always remember to make those adjustments with your color choices. So I'm not going to worry too much about this at the moment, just to try and get a bit of neck area blocked in. It's going to really help me with the rest of the values on the face. So you can see how colour really relates to the colours around it. Sometimes something just doesn't look right until you get some of those surrounding tones in. And again, in under the chin, we've got cooler tones. obviously in the shadow from underneath her chin here. And really using the broad mark that I get from the pastel stick to my advantage here. I'm not looking for really fine lines. I'm using that lovely flat edge on the pastel. But then when you do want a really fine line, it's still possible to get that by turning the pastel around a little bit and working it until you find a little edge. And of course, if you don't get it 100% where you want it, you can always come in with the pastel pencils and just refine that line until you're happy with it. So just that little bit of reflection under the chin already starting to help the face stand out from the background of the neck area. And I'm trying to decide when I'm looking at this jawline, is the neck darker in this area or is the edge of the jawline darker in this area? And it changes as we go across the neck here. So just pay particular attention to all of your edges. That's what's going to really help the 3D quality of your work in general. Edges are so important. How you render your edges will make all the difference in your work. And it starts to get a little bit more difficult to lean your hand on the work without smudging it or getting your hand covered in pastel. Sometimes I just lean my finger somewhere like this or my knuckle, and you can very easily anchor your hand just in a small area on a part of the painting without leaning your hand flatly on the whole thing. So I've really just got my knuckle leaning on that middle part of the ear, which I haven't really bothered working yet. So I'm not ruining any part of what I've already worked. Just using the white pastel pencil to strengthen some of the highlights on the side of the face as it comes down to meet the chin here. And to just lighten this side of the face ever so slightly. You can see how useful the pastel pencils are. Again, not necessarily to get really strong marks, but to tint certain areas and to do it in a really subtle way, which is perfect for people portraits especially. as quite often a lot of the colour gradation that you're seeing is really subtle. So I'm by no means finished with the neck area, but I'm at least feeling like I've got some of it blocked in, and it certainly helps me to picture the rest of the face a little bit more finished. So again, this bottom part of the portrait, not sure if I'll get much time to come back to this, but nice to get a bit of it blocked in at this stage. Hopefully it will help the portrait look a bit more finished. So I've got a bit of a protest going on in the room here next to me. There are several little animals who want their dinner. So I'm going to take a quick break from this. You guys won't notice because I will come back and it'll seem like I was here the whole time. But it's a good thing to do, especially when you're painting a portrait. because you go away from it seeming like there are a million things left to do and lots of things that aren't right. And when you come back, magically with fresh eyes, you tend to see several areas that need corrected. And you have a more clear vision of how you should go about it. So maybe you should do the same. Get up off your chair, stand back from your portrait, have a good look at it in the mirror or from a distance, and really think about where you're heading with it and what you can start to fix. And that's what I'll do, so I will down tools and come back shortly. So I'm back again after a short break, and I bet you didn't even notice I was gone. Maybe you took a break too. So back with fresh eyes again, and I think what I'm going to tackle next are her eyes. I'm tired of looking at the zombie stage. I really want to get someone looking back at me. But just before that, the first thing I really noticed when I came back is just that some of these highlights are a little bit bright. I just want to tone down ever so slightly, add a bit more blue to this highlighted area on her brow. Just want to accentuate the shadow tones on this side of the face and really not let it go too bright. That way we're going to keep that nice light and shade effect that we're getting. So just tone them down ever so slightly. And now I'm going to make a start on the eyes. So I'll work this one first. I still haven't done too much to the chin area here. I think as I come down the face and I get working on the mouth area, I'll tackle this chin area. But for now, this whole space here gives me somewhere that I can lean my hand a little bit while I'm working on her eyes, so that's not a bad idea. So I've got a black Carbothello pencil. You'll notice that I'm picking up some different brands of pastel pencil, especially where black is concerned, because recently I made a video comparing all the blacks on the market, and I have a use for all sorts of different strength of black. So I will make use of all of them in my work. But this Carbothello ranked as one of the darkest blacks on the list. And I really like the texture of them as well. You can lean quite heavily, it's not going to crumble on you. So it's that I'm picking up for the darkest work around her eyes. So one of the areas that most people get tricked on when they're doing a people portrait is the whites of the eyes. And they are seldom white, because once you tuck something into the eye socket here, you're inevitably going to have some shadows. So I'm actually seeing a lot of the blue colour that I've been using as the highlights on the shadow side of the face, and I'm going to dot some of that into that corner space and just a little bit over this side as well, trying to find a little point on the pastel. And you can see that I haven't really aimed that perfectly in there, but I can always come back with my black and shape that into place. So still I like to use the bigger sticks just to get that real strength of colour. And you can usually find a little edge on the pastel stick for the job. And rather than really rubbing in this area, even just tapping it, pressing it into place like that is enough. So she's got beautiful dark brown eyes, but a lot of it is in shadow, so there's some really nice highlights on the eyes which are hopefully just going to bring this to life. I really don't think that I've got a huge amount of detail to add to these eyes, so they shouldn't take me too long. Eyes are so important in a portrait, but sometimes less is more, so you don't necessarily have to spend ages on the eyes to get them looking just like the person. And that's what I'm hoping with this, that I can just get everything in the right place and then add those all important highlights towards the end. But certainly a lot of the work gets done using the pastel pencil in this case. Those sharper edges are indeed very useful. So just really paying attention to the sweep of the shape of the iris, sitting at quite an unusual angle because of the tilt of her head. So it's one of the reasons why I don't work the eyes until this point. I really like to have that whole surrounding area sort of in place before I commit to the eyes. Then of course while you're working on the eyes you can work on the little subtle bits of highlight that you find on the rim or in the corners. And I also want to bring a little bit of warmth into this shadow just underneath her eye. Again, it's such a lovely warm skin tone, so I don't want to let it go too cold in any areas, bringing in this lovely rich red just to liven it up a bit. Also then we do have some reflection in the very corner of the eye, but it's quite a cool little dot of colour. Using my BV7 for that, nice and cool. And it's really quite dark in this corner of the eye, so you can't really see a lot of detail, which is great for me because it means that I can use the less is more idea here. Just a few little bits of highlight perhaps in at the corner of the eye. But again, subtle highlights. It's really in the depths of the shadows in here. Then I can allow for something a bit brighter to create the shadows actually on the other side of the eyeball. So just about trying to aim. Sometimes I touch the paper and try to test where the pastel is going to fall before really making a heavier mark. And if I get that roughly in the right place at all, then I can come back in with the darker pastel pencils and really shape it into place. So I hope that you can see just how little detail sometimes you need to go into. So I'll get the other eye worked up to the same level, and then I'll have a think about those nice eyelashes. But that's already starting to come to life a little bit more. So same thing with the other eye, just strengthening the outlines with the black. Really getting the dark creases of the eyelid. but trying not to let it look just like big black solid lines, trying to soften that with a little bit of a red earth colour as well. Always trying to keep the warmth in there too. So it's fine to use jet black in certain areas, but there are ways that you can tone down the edges a little bit, not let it look too harsh. So just like before, I give myself a little outline of the iris, just making sure I've got that ellipse looking at the right angle. Such a lovely pose, this, just looking upwards. And such a great model. I can't thank her enough for doing this for me. Someone so natural. She's proven to be a real joy to paint. Makes me happy just looking at her. So again, like before, dropping in a bit of this blue. Quite often it's all about going dark enough with your values. You're going to see the same business on the teeth in a little while, where it's all about going dark enough. Those areas that we associate with being white rarely actually look white. So you've really got to retrain your brain away from thinking about the colour that you think things are, and really look at the colour you're actually seeing. And that's really the trick with everything. Once you've got that, you can paint absolutely anything. So again, just a few more little bits of shine on the skin. And again, I want to try and bring in a little bit of warmth to this area under the eye. At the moment it's just looking very dark, and it is dark in the photo reference. I just want to try and bring in a little bit of warmth there too. You can see that you barely need to touch the paper in some cases, really just almost brushing on a little bit of pigment, barely touching the paper. So a lighter touch is often key for stuff like this. And this light grey, just a little bit brighter than my blue pencil there. Very useful for these tiny little dots of highlight, where it's perhaps just a little bit too ambitious to get a big stick to make those marks. I'm also happy for them to be a little bit more subtle than the main sparkly highlights on the eyes. And again, if I'm not happy completely with the shape that I've put on, I can use the pastel pencil just to shape it a little bit better. And that also makes it stand out a little bit more. So just some minor adjustments after putting the pigment on. So again, lovely dark eyes. Just going to drop in some of this rich BE6, little tiny pebble. This colour is also in my Unison Animal set. Definitely one of those colours that I pick up for almost every painting. Just so useful. And I'm actually seeing a little touch of a more green colour over in some parts of this eye. So normally the white of the eye is just anything but white. That's really my biggest tip for painting people. And it really is one of those things that will transform your people painting and take the flatness out of your faces. Definitely one of the common mistakes that I always see. So there's really not a lot I can see in terms of detail in here. Sometimes in a portrait you really will spend ages on the eyes, but with this one I don't think it's going to be necessary. Hopefully I can catch her likeness from this. Just focusing on getting the shape of the iris, the angle that we're seeing at, before adding the all-important highlights. So again, we've got one pretty big highlight on this side of the eye, which is crossing over the white of the eye and the iris. And again, it's quite a cool highlight. So I'm using my BV7. Just trying to aim the sharp edge of the pastel. Again, if I don't get it on here perfect, I can shape it better. But without the dark area, which you associate with being the white of the eye, without that being much darker, this sort of highlight just wouldn't stand out at all. So it shows just how important it is to have the white of the eye much darker so that your actual highlights show up. So that's what I keep saying, colour is relative. If you want your bright highlights to really sing, then you've got to get those dark values around them. Maybe just try and get that little highlight to curve a little bit more. Always tricky when I'm filming because I sit on the other side of the painting, so I can't actually see where I'm aiming. So I have to go at things like that a little bit blind sometimes. But it's such a forgiving medium that it allows you to have several goes at things like this. Of course, you can sit on this side of your painting and really look at where the point of the pastel is meeting the paper. And that's going to make your life a lot easier. But for me, sitting on the wrong side of this, I can't actually see where my pastel is going to meet. So I've got to be a little bit careful. Test it out first. And then just really try and go for it. and neaten it up afterwards. So it's a bit of a delicate operation, but more so for me because of the filming. So don't be afraid to move around your painting. Try and see exactly where you're making contact on the paper when it comes to those important little highlights. But I think this already starts to look a bit more alive. Thank goodness we are out of the zombie stage. So I really could spend a lot longer on the eyes. Of course, you could fiddle about with those for ages, just trying to get everything exact because they are important in a portrait. But I think for the purposes of this demo, that is probably close enough. So perhaps now just to add some of the eyelashes. And again, you don't want to go overboard with this. You don't want them to look really like spider legs or really over the top. And you can barely see them on this side actually. So I'm really just going to use the pencil to flick some of the darker pigment out over the edges. And they're a bit more visible on this side because we've got some light over here. So the main thing, you want to be sure that you've finished working on the eyelid and that area because you don't want to be trying to work in between the eyelashes. And you want to leave some of that highlight showing through the lashes. So I'm not leaning too heavily. I'm using the black pigment from within the eyes and just lightly flicking that out. She's got a real natural look about her, so I don't want to go overboard with that. But I think that's not too bad for the eyes, so I'll move on to something else, and those are areas that I would come back to towards the end. Really double check everything, all of my values, each little curve and shape. But I think we're not too bad with that. So I think the next area that I want to work on now is the mouth area and around this side of the chin, because I really haven't done very much here. You can still actually see a lot of the sand coloured paper shining through here. So coming on down the face, just strengthen again some of these darkest creases. Some of them really are quite dark, being in the shadows like this. And before I start to add some of the highlights around them, I just want to make sure that I've got them dark enough to begin with. And again, a lot of the highlight colours on this side of the face. I'm going to pick up that lovely dusky blue. And the lighting was really nice in this photograph because we've got light mainly coming from the left of her, but we've also got a nice light source on the right side of her, creating some of those lovely highlights over here. So when you're choosing a photo reference to paint somebody from, try and make sure that you've got really nice lighting in the photograph. Something that will add real interest to your painting. That's half the battle. So much harder to create a portrait from something that's poorly lit or that's just quite flat to begin with. Difficult to create form and shape when it looks quite flat in the photograph. So the more dramatic the lighting is, sometimes the better for portraits. Again, another colour that I believe is in the animal set. Just as useful in people portraits. And I will allow a little bit of the BV7 over on this real shiny cheek. I did tone down some of my highlights on the side of the face. But this one is pretty bright, so always try to compare all of your highlight colours to each other. And again, searching out some little areas for this lovely earthy green to go in. It's barely a green, it's got a bit of a tint to it really. Quite an earthy colour. One that I really like using in skin tones though, and it goes so nicely against all of the red tones that I've used in this piece. So again, we've got some highlights on this side of the chin. Just trying to place that main one on the bottom right of the chin here. Using my dusky blue first of all, and again, like with this one, I may lighten it a little bit more. But such absolutely beautiful skin to paint this is. So rich in colour. And then of course over on this side of the chin we've also got more highlight colours coming in from the right, where that sunlight is coming from. So it is funny how the line drawing never really looks like the person when you're starting out. And it's really only when you start to get some of the form using the colours that it starts to come to life. That's what I really love about producing people portraits. Your line drawing, you just have to trust that you've got those proportions correct. And that once you start bringing in the light and shade, because I don't really do that in my line drawing, I don't really bother to add any shading. That's what I do with the colour. And that's the fun of pastel then, just picking out all of the 3D forms on the face. Again, anywhere those highlights start to recede into the shadows, really thinking about the colour that I'm using, picking up that blue instead of the lighter, warmer tints. So just looking at how the light comes around the corner of her chin here. course the actual base of her chin is quite dark. So I think that's getting there, and almost now ready to start work on the lips and on the teeth. Just seeing if I can pick out any more colours around this area. But I think we're close enough with this now. I'm gonna get the teeth in. And like with most things, I like to work from background to foreground. So I'm gonna work what's inside the mouth so that then I can go over the top of that and really get the nice clean line of the lip on top of what's inside the mouth. So first thing, like with most things, having a look at the darkest areas. So there are some really dark areas as we recede way back into the mouth. And I'll get these blocked in first. So at the corners of the mouth here. And just having a real look at the line of the lip as it flows across here. Not leaning too heavily at this point, only really leaning heavily in at the corners here where I'm sure it's got to be really dark. And then I'm just going to quickly give the teeth a little bit of outline help with the brown pastel pencil. Just in certain areas where there really is a lot of contrast between them. Before I start to come in with any of the soft pastel. Don't forget that lips and gums are also flesh colours. And in this case, I can see a lot of plum, sort of purple shades. But what I want to get in first are some of those darkest areas. Just like with everything that I do, I'm looking for the darkest areas first. So it's not so much giving the teeth a full outline here. Don't want them to look like each tooth has an outline. But I'm just looking for the darkest spaces between them And she's got great teeth to practice on. This is perfect for those of you who don't like painting teeth, because a bit like my own teeth, they don't go in a perfect straight line. They're not a generic smile. Her teeth have a lot of character to them, and I really like that in a face. It's something I haven't really liked about my own teeth most of my life, but actually I've grown to really like it over the years, because I suppose it's part of my character. I think we're often very critical of our own faces. And one thing that I find that art helps me to do is be less critical and more appreciative of those quirks or those bits of character that make one person so different from everyone else. And I think the more you paint faces, the more you, I suppose, grow to appreciate those quirks, not just in other people, but in yourself as well. Art's a really good visual therapy, I think. It helps you see things for what they are, just interesting shapes and colours. So if you haven't tried one before, why not have a go at a self-portrait? That really makes you see yourself very differently. Definitely one of the trickiest types of portrait to do, I think. The study of one's self. So just little hints of the bottom teeth where we can see them in here. Again, I'm gonna take a similar approach to how I did the eyes, where less is more. It's more to do with their placement and their angles and then the colours, rather than trying to get each little detail exactly right. So this colour is one that I've picked up. I think I can see a lot of this in her lips and also in her gums. So I'm gonna dot a bit of this in just above the teeth, right along the gum line. So it is quite fiddly, delicate work, this. Eyes and teeth are notoriously difficult in portraits. And that was one of the reasons I was really pleased that my patrons chose this image, because the more you shy away from painting certain things, well, the less chance you have at improving on those things. So sometimes you just got to tackle something head first. And the more you paint anything, the more comfortable you'll get at it. So if you dislike painting teeth, what you should really do is force yourself to paint lots of teeth. That's usually the key. The less you try something, the more you will dislike it, and the less progress you'll make. So you gotta be brave. And sometimes that involves forcing yourself to do things that you don't like. And I promise though, the more you do it and the more you see yourself improve at it, the more you'll grow to like it. That's happened to me with every single subject matter that I've ever avoided doing in the past. So there's a good bit of reflection on the gums as well. I'll come to that after. I think I'll get the teeth blocked in first of all. And surprisingly, I'm not using white for the teeth. If you look really closely at the teeth, there are lots of little highlights all over them. So if we use white for the teeth initially, you're not going to see those highlights at all. So instead, using little hints of this very light brown earth, this light orangey colour, dot a little bit of that across some of the teeth. Can definitely see some warmth to the teeth in certain areas. Teeth are never white. It's another one of those things that's just like the whites of the eyes. Unless you're, I don't know, Tom Cruise and you've had some kind of whitening procedures done to your teeth, then your teeth aren't going to be white. Because they're inside your mouth, they're going to have shadows. I think even Tom Cruise, when he smiles, unless he's in the direct sunlight, there's going to be some other colours on there. So really try to work against what your brain is telling you and go for colours that you can actually see. So perhaps we get a little bit lighter as we come over this side of the face. But there's certainly no white on these teeth or on anyone's teeth. So again, by layering up the colours, adding a warmer tone underneath. Then this lovely light BV7 is great for just coming and adding a bit of coolness to them and lightening them a bit more. But honestly, you don't want to go too light with the teeth. It's just not going to look realistic. It's exactly the same idea as the whites of the eye. It always stands out in a portrait to me if the teeth and the eyes are too bright. So I'm not leaning heavily, I'm really just rubbing lightly a bit of pigment off the sticks onto the teeth. And I'm not too worried about getting it exactly in the right place because I will use pastel pencils to come back in here and neaten all of this. And as we recede further into the back of the mouth there, it's even more in shadows. But you can see that you're better going on dark with the teeth first of all and working your way up, because if you go in with white, you're just going to kill any chance that you have to add some actual highlights. As with everything else, we need the contrast. And this piece of BV7 is proving really good because there's just a lovely sharp edge to it. And I'm really able to pick out the edges of the teeth quite nicely. So on these teeth towards the back here, we've really got some lovely bright highlights Just trying to dot in some little bits of this BV7. But again, the key is to be subtle about it. It's usually a case of going darker than you think to begin with, and trusting that you can lighten it. So if I get these gums darkened down enough, and the gums are quite dark in some areas, so I'm going to really use those to shape the teeth now. And the more I darken the gums, of course, the more the teeth should pop out. So a lot of the time it's all about treating colour as being relative. Try not to think of certain items as always being white. Think of them in terms of the light that you're seeing them in, what they're next to, as all of that will affect the colour and give you their true colour, as opposed to what your brain is trying to tell you they are. Honestly, if you crack that, that really is the trick of painting. Looking for the true colours. I know there's a song like that, isn't there? Looking for the true colours. And if you can hear sniffing in the background, again, it's not me. I've got furry friends around me, and they're often in requesting treats. So you wouldn't know it, but sometimes I do hit pause and I disappear off to the kitchen. And we have a round of treats. The things that go on in the background of my videos, you've no idea. It's not just the regular loo bricks for me. I've got lots of little furry people demanding attention sometimes. But they're usually very good. Quite often I've got all of them lying in their beds around me while I work. They usually behave very peacefully when I'm working. But there is something about the record button on the camera that seems to bring out the demons in them some days. So just using a little bit of pastel pencil to better shape the teeth from the inside. And of course we've got some brighter highlights over on these teeth because they are over next the daylight. So just like everything else, think about where the light is coming from. Is it really as bright as you think it is? So I'm going to break a little piece of, well, let's see if I've got a smaller piece of white actually. In this box I tend to keep all of my lightest tints. So I'll try and find a little small shard. That might be small enough. It would be nice if I could get a little hard edge on something. If I can find a small enough piece in here, I'll break it in half and that'll give me a lovely sharp edge. So here I've got a little piece of white, and you would think it's small enough, but I'm actually going to break it again. And I get two lovely little sharp shards which are going to come in useful on all sorts of different paintings. So just take any excess little crumbly bits off it, and that really is a perfect little piece of pastel. And I can just very delicately add a little bit of bright highlight down some parts of the teeth. So if you're wondering why I wouldn't just pick up the pastel pencil here, I just wouldn't get the same strength of colour from the pencil for this job. Sometimes that softest pastel gives you the strongest colour. And when you're talking about very delicate little highlights like this, then the stronger the pigment, the better. So back onto the BV7 for a few highlights on the teeth over here as they recede over into the shadows. And it's tricky because they're so small, and of course the pastels are quite big. So again, just like with the highlight on the eyes, it can be a little tricky. Just trying to add a little bit of shine, but being very sparing with that. Really trying to not go overboard. I do want them to remain quite dark. And we really can't see much of the bottom teeth, but they are visible in there. Just getting the line of the bottom lip in again. So now just really honing in on the shape of each individual tooth. And trying to make the background colour darker behind them as well. That's going to make the teeth look brighter without me having to make the actual teeth brighter. So just working at the edges of them. Trying to just get the shape of each one correct. It's definitely a tricky area of any portrait. They're usually quite small within the portrait, so that's why I suggest also working a bit bigger if you want to give yourself more space for features like this. You will find the bigger the scale you work on, the easier certain aspects of it become. If you're trying to get detail, it's certainly easier on a bigger scale. So just going back and forth between the darkness of the background and now using the pastel pencils and their lovely points just to try and round off any edges, make them look a bit more natural like they do. So these smaller bottom teeth in behind, using the top teeth to judge where they go. And they are much darker than the top teeth. So I'm really just going to add a hint of those in because that's really all I can see. Just a very subtle view of those bottom teeth in there, with one or two bits of highlighted area. See if I can get a little bit of that to shine out. And then also, like I mentioned, on the top gum area, you've got a little bit of reflection just to make the gums look wet. And over on this side, going to use the blue. Try and find a little point of that. just for a couple of little dots of reflection along the gums. So I'm going to work the lips now, and I may well decide to come back and do a little bit more to these teeth, but it's really hard to judge them just at this moment without the lips in. So I'll get the lips blocked in and we'll see how the colour values on the teeth begin to look. Will I need to go a little bit darker with the gums to make the teeth look even brighter? We'll see once I get the lips blocked in. So similar colour to what I used on the gums. And I'm just going to use this lovely plummy purple here to block in the lips. And of course we've got some stronger tones on the lips as well. Bring in a little bit of this warm red. And quite often you will find a lot of the fleshy colours that you've used on the skin within the lips also. And again, it's another one of those cases where you need to go dark enough to begin with. Then you can add subtle highlights that will just bring it to life, hopefully. So definitely the most fiddly part of this portrait. They can really make or break a portrait. But I don't think we're too far away at this stage. Then I want to get a little bit more work done to her hair. And perhaps block in the top a little more. But we're not too far away. I hope that you've enjoyed working along. So just searching for a few little bits of highlight on the lip, some reflections on this bottom lip here. Picking up the blue again. Just continuing that little line of reflections that comes right up from the chin here. And of course this side of the lips, picking up more light on this bottom lip here especially. So again, anytime you put some highlights down and you're not quite happy with the shape of them, you can always use your pastel pencil to come in and shape it a little bit better. Just looking for that center crease there in the bottom lip. So really on this scale there's only so much detail I can go into on the lips. As I've said, you'd need to work a bit bigger than this if you really wanted to get like each little line on the lips. I'm really trying to get the effect with as little detail as possible. That's my aim. But just trying to darken down some parts of the lips. Especially in towards the corners where it really does go into the darkest. So I don't think that's looking too bad. Again, this is an area that I could sit and play with for quite a while. But I hope that from what I've done here you get the gist. So the main key is just to not go too bright on the teeth. Trust that the teeth will look bright enough that you'll not make them look like they've got really yellow or grey teeth, but that you're just seeing the teeth with the appropriate shadows on them, as you would expect from being inside the mouth. Just a little bit of white over on this side. Try and shape the bottom of this one. This one just touches the lip a little bit, or seems to sit out over the lip. So yeah, it's an area that you could spend a lifetime fiddling about with. But I think for the purposes of the demo, we will soon move on to the hair. Okay, I think we can move on to the hair. Just before starting to add in more of the hair, I want to block in this ear a little bit more convincingly, because although it's covered mostly by the hair, I would like the couple of highlights that we can see in there to look right. So just again, bear in mind that the footage you're seeing me paint here, it looks a little bit askew. My proportions don't look quite right, but just bear in mind that the camera is set off to one side. I'm sort of sitting a little bit to the right of the portrait, but I've got to put the camera slightly to the left of the painting. So I will show you some finished previews of it from head on. But it does look a little bit wonky in the video here, just because you're viewing it from over my left shoulder. So I really have very little to do with this ear. I'm going to let the hair partly conceal it as it does in the photo reference. Just wanted to add a little hint of some of the lighter tones that I can just about make out through the hair. But I even think that that might get me away with it. So yeah, let's have a look at this hair. So I haven't really done anything other than do a quick bit of blocking in, which helped me in the beginning to see just how dark I needed to go with the skin tones. And I'm going to try and leave it pretty loose and not worry too much about getting every single hair in the right place. I think that I quite like the idea of leaving this pretty loose and quite soft around the edges. I think it'll actually really suit the softness of her features. And just to accentuate a few hairs here and there might be nice. And perhaps just before I add more of the hair in on this side, it's quite nice and shadowy behind her head here. She's standing against a wall. Maybe I will cool this side down a little bit. It's wonderful what a difference the hair can make towards the end of a portrait. I often leave it till close to the end. Portraits are just so much fun to do because you get to see someone really come to life. So I'm just using my black Faber Castell here. Perhaps I will use a little bit of pastel pencil as well, but I want to keep it quite soft. Just looking for the overall shapes of these curls. how they flow out from her head. Again, it's nice because over here is quite in the shadow, so it lets me get away with being a little bit less fussy about these hairs. And as I work my way up her head, I'm just looking at how far out the hair should really come from her ear here. So this is why I like to get the background in first, no matter how simple the background might be. I want to be able to see some of that background through the hairs. I always think that people with lovely curly hair are so lucky, because you can literally just bunch it all up on top of your head and it looks amazing. But anytime you talk to someone with beautiful curly hair, they've got nothing but complaints. And those of us with straight or wavy hair also have complaints, so no one's ever happy with what they've got. But I would love to have really dramatic curly hair. Just looks great no matter what you do with it, in my opinion. Of course, those of you who have this curly hair will probably argue with me that it's a pest. But there we go, we're never happy with what we've got. So yeah, maybe a little bit of pastel pencil just to add a bit of detail to some of the curls, especially over on this side here. I can start to drag some of the hairs more lightly out. And as you get more to the edges and you want some flyaway hairs, You can be a lot lighter in those parts. Maybe even bring in a little bit of brown rather than the black. But it really is more the black that I'm seeing in most of it. Black with a lot of blue highlights. So that's what I'm going to stick with. Really just catching the edges of some of the outer curls. Don't want to go overboard. I don't want it to look like she's got grey hair or anything. So I did just realise that I wasn't fully zoomed out whilst working on the top of the head here. But I hope you get the idea of what I was just loosely doing around the sides here. Not going into a huge amount of detail for the hair. Really just blocking it in, letting the soft edges remain soft. Sometimes less is more, as I keep saying, but in this case I have less time, so that's mostly why less is more. But I do also like those soft, unfinished edges to the portrait as well. So I'm not sure that it really needs a lot more detail than this. Maybe just a little bit more height. It's really about using the height at the top of the head here to get the full bulk or shape of her outline. That's my main aim with the hairline. But I'm happy to really smudge those edges and let it be nice and soft. I think sometimes that really suits a portrait like this anyway. So as for the rest of it, I'm quite tempted to leave it pretty unfinished like this. Just letting the shirt disappear down into drawing. I feel like I've got enough detail perhaps in her neck just to finish off the bottom of the portrait here. Perhaps just get a little bit of the highlight colour coming around the collar here, around the neckline. But sometimes it's also nice to leave these parts a little bit unfinished. So yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed this. I'll show you some close-ups now. And don't forget that if you have enjoyed painting along with me, to go and check out my full series of these paint along tutorials. There are now quite a few of them, and you can spend quite a long time now painting along on several different types of project. So I've got a lot of animals up there, a little bit of landscape. We've got some domestic animals as well as some wildlife. And another people portrait too, if you're interested in having a go at a different type of project to this. So let's show you the finished piece with some close-ups. So that's me finished, and I hope that whether you've been working along with me or just watching my progress, that you've enjoyed this small portrait. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to make a bonus video for my patrons explaining how I go about choosing a palette of colours like this before I start to paint. And if you've been working along, you will notice that it's been quite a limited palette. So I'll give you a few close-ups of the piece here. And if you have enjoyed this, I would just simply ask that you subscribe here on YouTube and perhaps leave me some good feedback in the comments below. That's really helpful and I appreciate all of your support. And if you can, check me out over on Patreon, as it's the guys over there who are funding me to make all of my videos, both on Patreon and here for free on YouTube. So without that support, I just wouldn't be able to devote so much time to this. So thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy pasteling.